Are we all ready in the era of AI? I think that's the question that we'll talk a little bit about today. There's two statements that are very similar and very true. But one, I don't think we're there quite there yet. But I'd like to test that and just get your guys' feel of where we're at with AI. So I'll ask you to raise your hand when I say a statement that you agree with. There'll be 4 statements. So the first one is AI is coming, but it's not here yet. Anyone? Excellent. Just remember that. Remember what you voted, because we'll come back and ask some questions. The second one is we're in a stage of hobby AI. AI is a hobby, but it's not enterprise yet. Who feels that way? You've raised your hand twice. Say it's both, okay. Third one is we are in the stage of enterprise AI now. Who thinks that? Wow, okay. Terrific. And the fourth one is AI is just a conspiracy theory and it's not true. Anybody? Okay, we can eliminate. Oh, there's one back there. So let's go back. Do you mind just kind of someone that kind of put up their hand for the first one is it's not here yet. Why do you think that? And maybe we'll get a mic and pass it around.
I feel like personally that the AI is not there yet because for AI there's still a lot of mistakes it is making. Uh, it is not reliable, and right now humans have come in such a stage that AI can still not compete with it. That's personally in my take.
I like it. Good. That's a really good view. Thank you. Now, somebody else that put up their hand that said we're in the stage of hobby AI, but we're not in enterprise AI yet. Anybody care to comment on their view on that? There's a lot more hands, so don't be shy. Somebody on that stage? Who put up their hand that said we're trying it out, but we're not in full enterprise AI yet? Paul, do you want to? Yeah.
I actually did put my hand up on that one.
Did
but
you?
I
Okay,
wanted
well, I
to see
caught
if
you
somebody
up.
else was going to put their hand up there. I think we're really just starting, and I think organizations and people and the globe are just trying to get an understanding of where and how it could be applied to the workplace. And I think there are some people who are just dipping their toe in the water for now and then realizing that actually it can have a fundamental impact on the way that they're running their business, but they can't go too fast because if they don't have the skills to support it, it's not going to be able to support itself. It could have a fundamental impact on their business. So I think that's why we're in that early stage.
It's a really good point. Anybody else care to comment on that? Any hands? Okay, so there are some hands that said we are in enterprise AI now. Who had their hands up? We can't all have the answers from the front row. That's a bit wrong. So somebody who said we're in enterprise AI now, just share with us why you think that might be. Any volunteers here? I know some hands came up. Everybody's shy from lunch. There's one. Okay, fantastic.
I think so because at this point AI can be used as a neutral body. So I mean, in the context of a workplace, when we have a boss who might or might not have a personal bias towards us, but when a similar problem that is being faced by the HR of the company, and AI can solve it in a much better way because it can understand the neutral background of the same. Moreover, in human relations, because the inherent bias does not exist with AI, at the same time, bias regarding many other issues like the religion, caste, skin color, all of that does not occur with the AI. So maybe that is the reason AI can be integrated into the system. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for your insight on that. And there's one hand, I think, in the corner about a conspiracy theory. Do you want to talk to that, or are you okay? Okay. Look, I think that all four of them are true, and I'll tell you why. I think
Hello.
I've seen AI emerging. I'm sorry, we had a comment. Yeah.
I would speak about that.
Okay, great.
Do I need to stand?
If you like, please. So
Yeah, I
people
would
can see
stand.
it.
I would stand. I would speak about the rapid growth of AI in the past 4 years. It's kind of tensing us, I think enterprises, companies, stock markets are more deviated into the AI. I think now, I don't know how many of us has used cloud as primary software for judging stock markets, but
Yeah.
it's surreal to see that it's predicting so accurate that I think the investments are not going just into drain. So I can say that it's a conspiracy because I can't believe the surreal growth of AI in just 4 years. I think predicting stock markets is not just a easy thing. So I think it's a conspiracy to hide this thing and then pumping it rapidly, and it's a breakout now. So I think it's a conspiracy, a little bit of conspiracy, not that much. Thank you.
I like the perspective too, and I think that's a little bit where I was going on the financial side. But I think if we walk through the four, I mean, I think AI is still developing and it will continue to develop. I've personally been involved in it for the last 13 years. So if we kind of go, the large language models really evolved in the last couple of years, but we've been doing this for a long time and it'll continue to evolve. So it's coming and it'll still come. I think it's hobby, and I think where I'm seeing and interacting with companies is you can see it in their budgets. So they'll set aside money on what are we going to do with AI. And initially it's like, I want to do some trials. I'll set aside 100 grand to do this. I'm not setting aside 100 million to do that yet. It's a big project, right? So I think we'll see that emerge. But I think, in my opinion, I think we're a little bit in between hobby AI and full enterprise. The people who have explored it early are now starting to deploy it in enterprise and both in many different ways. So, using from a large language model perspective or going to agentic as far as processes. I also advise private equity firms, and I think this is where the conspiracy happens. I was advising a company that was doing neural network modeling in the AI space, and they thought they had a brilliant product, and they probably did. They thought it was worth $1 billion if we just put it on the AWS cloud. And that was the conspiracy theory, is like, well, this probably needs to solve a problem to get some value to it. So that's a good opening, I guess, from that perspective. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself as background, so that kind of helps you. So currently, I do sit on the board of Federation University. And the reason I do is probably from a very long-term relationship with Federation University. And it was from a previous role. So I was formerly the head of IBM for Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN, and Korea. And we had about 550 people in the tech park in Ballarat. So I worked very closely with the university as what demands we had for skill sets coming up. So, I would be looking at, I need to hire 500 data scientists, and working with the university to try to go, how do we create that sort of capability, and also provide input into the curriculum to say this is what's valuable to the corporate industry side as the partnership. So I started there, and from that they asked me to join the board as I finished up with IBM. And really, I'll probably assume the role of providing the industry insight to the university for that. As a result, I'm involved on the board of employability.life as well. So, extending that footprint out, and I think it's a great example of you guys have just experienced this. Going through sprints and the employability.life program. You will enter a job, and that's what we do in the real world, those sort of sprints. We do, design thinking, we do sprints, we do a problem, we do that, we have some deliverables, we go on to the next one. So when you show up to work, you're going to go, I know how to do this. I've done it. And other people will show up and go, I don't know. I have to learn that process. So I think you're a step ahead, and congratulations on that. I also sit on a board of a data center company. So it's building green data centers and looking at water cooling and different energy sources. Because as we go into AI, there's a lot of expansion of that demand. Ironically, I'm now helping them buy data centers I used to run in my old job. So it's kind of gone full circle. And then I also do advisory on an M&A bank. So I'm looking at a lot of the mergers and acquisitions in the industry. From a PE perspective, so a private equity perspective, I've also been helping on the buy, sell, and I call it oops. So when a private equity is looking at buying a tech services company, this is where I'm kind of helping them out. Trying to help them understand the value and then how to exit it, right? So I might find a startup, might be doing 50 million in revenue. I want to exit it to an Accenture or a Capgemini or something big. So how do you build that company for the exit? So I help them on the buy and trying to get the strategy for that. Help them on the exit as far as connecting with kind of the large end of town. And then the oops is always interesting. And this probably goes back to the conspiracy theory is I bought something, it was supposed to go like this, it hasn't, can you have a look at it and do that? So it's really interesting is I'm kind of getting a good view across a number of those things. And then I'm also working with the large GSIs on their growth strategy. So I spent a year with Accenture helping them on their growth strategy, both on inorganic, large AI deals and industry kind of penetration on that. So that's kind of the background of what I'm doing now. I'll go to kind of where I probably learned the most in my career, was I spent 20 years with IBM. So I started my own company. I turned it into a joint venture with IBM. We sold it. I went into IBM for 18 months in the earnout period and thought I'd be there for 18 months. And I retired after 20 years. So it was a fantastic company for me. Is every time I got to that point where I went, that was interesting. I want to do something new and I'm ready to go on to the next thing. It was a company that said, do you think you could fix this? And then, do you think you could fix this? And so for the next 20 years, it was a series of working with big accounts on transformations, working with businesses that were underperforming, and then running the business itself. And just as far as an education background too, because I think this is relevant. I talked to a lot of our graduates that have kind of come through and they said, what did you study? And, I've had the question that said, if I want to be, the managing partner, what do I need to do? And I said, don't look at me. I'm the wrong person. My undergraduate was exercise physiology. And then I did a master's degree in supply chain, an MBA. And my most recent degree is in music production, which is just a reason for me to keep learning. But I'll tell you, I've got a little story on the music production side, which is just for a little bit of fun and see if you know it. But Berklee School of Music is in Boston, and they offer an online music degree. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And we immediately got on and we started doing sprints in music, right? And they're like, okay, you just got this band recorded all this stuff, figure out how to make it sound good so you could put it on the radio. That was kind of the brief. So I get in my first group, and you guys probably have this experience is you're introducing each other, and we're going around the room, and this guy introduces himself. He says, I'm Steve, I'm a singer, and I'm trying to better understand the digital side of the industry. I've been in it for a long time, and I'm doing my 14th album. And has anybody on Zoom or on Teams call try to zoom in to see who the person is? And I'm looking at this guy, and he's in a studio. He's in a proper recording studio. He's got a hat on, and he's in there. And it was Steve Perry, the lead singer from Journey. And I don't know if any of you guys remember Journey. And so he was on my team. When I came in and introduced myself, I was Doug, an unemployed musician, which was completely true. I'm a musician and I wasn't employed as a musician. So that was a little bit of fun. So you meet people in the sprints over time that really help your network and your thinking and your creativity. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of business transformation. And I'd also like this to be a session you feel comfortable with. If you have questions as we go, please just raise your hands. I've told you a little bit myself. What I'm uncomfortable about is this is a master class, and which means I should be a master at something. I'm not a university lecturer who is really knowledgeable about all of the different depth areas that they present to you. What I'm going to share with you is my experience. So it's, as you take that in, you'll find different experiences from different people and take that and blend it. So as a master class, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. So business transformation is not really new, is it? So I imagine a lot of you kind of studied business first as the foundation of what you need. I think you think about how technology's been involved in business transformation. And I just wanted to share with you a few examples. And this is kind of going the history of technology and transformation up to where we are in the days of AI. And in some ways, things haven't changed that much, but they've sped up. So let me go back 20 years ago. And I was working at IBM, and we had a CEO come to us with a business problem. He was the CEO of an airline. It was growing too fast. They couldn't get the passenger volume through the space they had in the airport. And as a result, the queues to get in to check in at the time were huge. And he said, at the moment, I have to build a larger airport to facilitate my growth. Do you guys have any ideas? So very similar to probably a sprint problem statement that you've had. So we went away into IBM and thought, how can we get more people through a smaller space? And you'll think of this technology as very old school, and it is now. At the time, it didn't exist. So we kind of envisioned the concept of a kiosk. So you're familiar with a kiosk at an airport? So we were the first ones to come up with that idea. So we thought we can get the throughput much higher. The other interesting thing is to check in at a check-in counter pre-kiosk cost the company about $3.50 to process that person. A kiosk costs 22 cents. So we ended up coming up with this thing where you could get more people through a constrained space at a cheaper amount. It's a better experience for the flyer, and they didn't have to build the airport. So the CEO went to the airport and said, I'm buying these kiosks, but you're paying for it, Mr. Airport. And that's what happened. So, the process to get there, we were taking technology on the front end that connected to departure control systems and res systems in airlines and processing that. So kind of was early stage of automation. It took us about a year to come up with this. So you think about if that same problem turned up today, number one, iPhones weren't an option because they'd just come out. If that problem turned up today, you'd solve it in 2 weeks. So the speed of transformation is increasing quite a bit. I'll go to 10 years ago, and we were challenged with a different problem. So are you guys familiar with the company Walmart in the US? Okay. So they said to us, we're really, really good at supply chain planning until we're not. And they said, we can predict sales volumes in stores really well, but then we get these spikes and we can't understand them. They said, can you help us? And we said, well, what do you think they're coming from? And they're like, well, could be weather, could be events, could be news, it could be social media impact. They weren't quite sure. So we said, let's have a look. So we aggregated all of the news, and this is before LLMs, right? So you're having to build a data set that you could do machine learning against. So we're bringing together the news, we're bringing together social media, we're bringing together events, and we had this thing ready to go. We said, okay, we're ready, give us an event. And the first call we got was, we had a spike. And by the way, they gave us the state of Colorado to test this in. And they said, we had a spike on berry Gatorade. So you know the drink Gatorade? The blue one? Just remember the blue one. That'll be important later. Blue Gatorade spikes. They go, what do you see? We looked at the weather data. We went, it's hot. You know, people are drinking more. We kind of left that aside. About a week later, it spiked again. And we went, And we had another hit during that week on information transactions on berry Gatorade. There's a New York Times article that had to test 10 best hangover cures. And it was berry Gatorade and bananas. That's why I told you to remember berry Gatorade. We said to them, we said, are bananas spiking as well? And they said, yeah. And they said, well, it must be the weekend. People are planning ahead. And we kind of went, okay, tick, that case study's done. And then they called us back and they said, it spiked on Monday. And we go, what? What's going on? And so we were looking at the spike patterns, and it correlated with the Denver Broncos football team games. And so we went, so people are watching football. They're getting ready for a tough day the next day. They've just learned that the best hangover cure is berry Gator and bananas. And we said, what else is spiking? And they looked at it, and it was beer and chips. And we're like, okay, that's easy. So they tried something the next game, and they reconfigured the stores in Colorado, and they put berry Gatorade, bananas, chips, and beer at the front of the aisles. And sales went up massively, almost doubled. And so it was like really interesting experiment. Large data set, was difficult to pull together. But what they learned is that their supply chain thinking was based on the history, and they were not taking in some of the live data against that. And they ended up implementing a system that helped in their supply chain planning around that. The other case study that they came up with, which was less interesting to me personally, and I'll tell you why, was a social media phenomena that said, if you put sea salt in your shampoo, your hair shines better. That's why I wasn't interested. But they moved sea salt not only to where the salt lived, they put it next to the shampoo, and their sales went up. So it's interesting, the data insights are consistent. That probably took another year to go through all of that. You have that today as an LLM. All of that kind of curiosity and data really exists. So I think, again, it's another example of where the speed of transformation, I think, will continue. Do you like these examples? Yeah, I'll go with another one. Anybody work with airlines at all? Any experience with airlines? Okay. When you fly from point A to point B, you load fuel, of course. And there's a requirement of the fuel that you need to go from point A to point B. But there's some other things that might happen along the way. So when you're leaving the airport, there might be congestion on the runway, so you're on the ground longer. You burn fuel. When you take off, there might be weather issues that you have to divert for that you can see, and you calculate for how much additional fuel is. When you get to your destination airport, you might have air traffic control waits that you have to circle in order to land. You need fuel. So, and in some weather situations, you need to have an alternative airport in your plan and enough fuel to get there if you can't get into your primary airport. So the challenge that came to us from a Canadian airline was if we carry all this extra fuel and we land with it, we just carried freight. You know, we carried kilos of freight as far as fuel goes, was never used, and it cost us money to carry that because it adds weight to the plane. So that was the problem statement. And they thought they could save money in trying to better calculate the discretionary fuel that they needed. So we went weather, we got that. You know, we had a history of air traffic control times. We understood the FAA policies. We put them all into an application, and we missed something. We started as a technology company making recommendations to pilots on how much fuel to take. That was never going to work, right? They were not interested in, you don't tell me how I fly my plane, right? So we kind of had to go back to the pilots and go, all right, here's how we've determined it. And they got on board and they got their head around the data. And they saw something that we didn't see. They said, look, when we land with a high fuel level, it's usually because we have alternative airport fuel, but we don't need it as per the FAA guidelines because of the weather windows. So we don't need to carry that. And we went, okay, that's good. And they said, that's a policy change. So they changed the policy and they said, kill the program. You know, we'd build this app, just kill the program. So I'll kill it. I'm going to charge you for it. And they went, yeah, charge us for it because you solved the problem. But we went into it curious in the data and ended up being able to solve the problem. And it wasn't technology, but it was data insights. So you might have an experience in your career. You know, don't be religious about the technology. It's about the problem. So if you solve that problem, that makes the difference. I'll give you one more example that was a little bit more of a human intervention, but it was interesting. When COVID hit in March 2020 in Australia, the banks had a lot of applications for mortgage relief. So people were saying, I need some more time to pay because I'm unsure about my employment. And one of the banks we worked with had a year and a half of mortgage relief applications come in 1 week. So they were geared to process this. And then they had, a year and a half come in. And we really didn't know what was going to happen in COVID. So we said to the bank, take some of our people. And so this actually was involved with Ballarat too. So it was Fed Uni. And we had about 50 people we gave them to process it. And we had a guy on the data science team who was also part of the neurodiversity team. So his background was neurodiverse, extremely smart. He, 3 days after we got this year and a half worth of processing, he came back and he said, I finished it. And I said, what do you mean you finished it, Brendan? He goes, do you need more? He goes, no, I've done all of them. So in 3 days, this guy had processed all of them. And I said, tell me about this. And he said, there's an obvious pattern of what was coming through. And this is something that made sense to him in the way he thought. He said, I automated it and I've processed all of them. So we went back to the bank and said, can you check these? And so they went back and checked, and they were happy with the whole year and a half's worth of work. but it made him rethink. It's like, if we can automate some of that thinking, and this is more like agentic AI type of an approach, there's a big transformation. So I think really the message about the evolution of business transformation is that it's similar to what we've been doing, but the speed's compressed. You have access to the data that would have taken a year to put together today. And I think that's kind of what we'll see as transformation for today. If I was going to give you advice on how to approach transformation, I think you start with the fundamentals of how we've always approached transformation, and you think about the business components. So the components might be sales, it might be marketing, it might be finance, it might be HR, it might be supply chain. Within those components, you think about the strategy of it, the management of it, the execution of it. And then I think we've always thought that way. Now within those areas, you can apply AI and you go, okay, for execution in finance processes, I can do agentic. For strategy research on new markets, I might be LLM background with that. Or I might say, I'm going to set up an external LLM with my internal data, firewall between it, aggregate the answers and get better insights. So I think, if you have an opportunity to be involved in business transformation, ground yourself in the business. And I think we talked about this before. This is the T skills. So, you ground yourself in the business and then you go deep into one of the areas that you know. I guess examples of strategy, I would have questions to our marketing team in the past that would take a month and I can get in minutes now. And it would be things like, what's the market size for this in this particular country? And where's the background on it? So, through using some of the LLMs to get that information as a starting point adds so much speed. As an example, from a management point of view, the data insights and the design performance feedback through AI as you go into that managed level. And then, in the execution level, we talked about the more use of agentic AI in the execution layers. I think what it means for the employment market, and this might come back to the conspiracy theory on it, is jobs aren't going to go away, they're going to change, right? So you're going to do transformation faster. You need to think about how you do it, but you'll also be creating, revenue streams that didn't exist before, and suddenly you've got a new job. So I think the embracing, AI is important as to what it will continue to deliver, and it's happened before. So I think you look at some of the previous changes, whether it be cloud or even, I go back to a personal example is in 2004, I was the evangelist for RFID, which was this new technology. And how could we use it? Could we use it in warehouses and stuff like that? So when that came out, it was like a disruptive technology. Today, it's just normal. But I think AI will continue to play that path. I'll give you another tip, if you like, and that's key indicators that a transformation's coming, right? So if you look at the financial performance of a company and you think of a bell curve, if the company you're working with, profitability is operating in the tails, so either really good or really bad, that's 1. New leadership is 2, and industry disruption threats is 3. If you have all 3 of those show up in one of your clients, you're going for a transformation. It's a fun ride. So when we think about, or when in my past, when we've thought about who we're going to work with, we'd look at those indicators. So if a company was going poorly, new leadership, industry is disrupted, we'd go, that's where we're going. So as you look at your work that comes to you, you might find that as well. I'll just pause there. So far, is there any questions or comments? I'm amazed at how many people are awake right now. So I was saying to Paul, I think my record was 80% to sleep in a presentation after lunch, but I think I'm okay. So yeah. So how is AI reshaping business models, right? So we're talking about transformation, but I thought it'd be good to share with you what, for example, AI on a tech services company impact looks like. So I'll tell you a little bit about, if you look at an IBM, a Cognizant, Accenture, a Capgemini, the structures are very similar. And so if you think about the business, you'll have service lines in the business that do delivery. So on one side of the business, you might have cloud, and so you might have application development, application modernization, and then the run state for applications on that, and then the cloud component of the run. I'd kind of put that together as cloud operations as far as within the business. On the other side of the business, you've got elements of business transformation. So you'll have customer insight, CRM, you'll have HR, you'll have finance, supply chain, so functional areas of transformation. So if you look at the organization design, this is kind of what you'll see as the org chart for delivery. Across all of those, you'll see data and AI as how it supports each of those areas, and security goes across the whole thing. So if you think about, those areas as the delivery component, the go-to-market component for a tech services business is usually by industry. So you'll have, for media, you'll have for federal government, you'll have for retail, you'll have for CPG. And the skill sets in the company at that level is the understanding of the industry and how it can translate the industry problems with the solution areas into solutions. So, just kind of thinking through that, if you think about the speed of delivery on some of the areas for, if you go into the finance area, for example, and in BPO, you might have agentic AI as far as how does it increase the speed of the processing that's in there. In the strategy piece, it might be more on research on the background. I really like it in the sales piece. So if you're doing sales on the front end, is reusing previous proposals and information, and the speed to get a sales proposal out is critical to a services industry. So normally a cycle in a services industry might be client wants something, a proposal happens, to the start of the project might be 6 to 12 months. But I think we'll see those compressing as well. And then the speed to revenue goes in there. So that's a little bit kind of insight, I suppose, as to the tech services. I also see, for Australia, we used to design our onshore, offshore capabilities. And so if we were working on a project, we would typically have about 20% of the resources onshore and 80% mostly in India for us. And so it's really interesting, I guess, from a market perspective, as you think about it, is you have the opportunity to be involved in so many things around the world if that ratio kind of continues of looking for expertise that's offshore. Just one kind of insight, I guess, if you go to the tech industry, I'll share with you my view of the Australian tech and tech services industry right now, because it's a little bit odd. The top 10 players in Australia in tech services, so the Accentures, the IBMs, the Capgeminis, et cetera, make up about 25% market share, which if you go to North America, they're probably in the 50 to 60% market share. So it's kind of bizarre. There's probably about 8 companies in the 100 million to 500 million space, and then there's a long tail. So, and I say this because you might be seeing this in India as it comes up too, is that a lot of people are entering into the smaller companies, especially in the AI space. They're developing them. The PE firms are getting involved to start aggregating some of the small areas to be attractive to be bought by the big players. And so, if you're kind of looking at your career path, you might have opportunities in the big end of GSIs, but you might have the small areas, but you might also have in the smaller companies the ability to aggregate up and exit that way. So I think it's interesting. We're seeing that in our market, and it's an interesting play because there's at the part of the market at the low end and the high end is really people with expertise in the services, but it's money in the middle that's trying to put the pieces together. And so that's interesting. Are you guys seeing that at all here in India, that sort of pattern of the tail, I'd call it? Yeah. Similar? Great. So I think watch for that, because I think in the big end of town, they're going to need to grow. They'll start going inorganic growth from those. So if you have opportunities in small businesses coming out of study, they could end up being large businesses. That could be a career path you've never thought about, right? But it's an interesting one. I guess another couple of comments is some examples of again, how AI is affecting industries in financial services. So I've seen an AI company that is interrogating existing data in banking data at a customer level and anticipating when a client's going to leave. And so there's an obvious pattern in the data of how you use your bank. Are your balances going down? Have you been in the branch a lot lately? There's things that say we should reach out to this client and try to keep them and reduce the turnover. And the turnover in a bank's a big problem. But again, it's an interesting one. Is it's a small company that's saying, I don't need to own all the systems. I just need to get the data from them, and I'll interrogate it through my algorithms and come back with, here's a list of the people that you need to look after. So that's an interesting example in financial services. In the energy sector was an interesting discussion I had with the CEO. Is we had to upgrade SAP for a energy provider, and it's very expensive to upgrade SAP. And the SAP is very good. I'm not knocking SAP. It's an expensive exercise, and when a CEO has to take it to the board and say, I'm going to spend all this money, the business case is hard. So what they looked at, he goes, now that I've digitized all of my supply chain stuff, what else can I do? And so this example, they took the SAP supply chain information with weather data and looked at foliage maintenance. So one of the things you have to do in an electric company is make sure that trees aren't going to fall on power lines to take out power grids, which is very expensive. So can they look at the data on the foliage and do preventative maintenance on it to do that? But they're using the weather data forecast to manage where to deploy resources to do the work. And that was a business case that paid for the SAP upgrade. So I think it's interesting as if anybody's working in kind of that ERP space, SAP space, the S/4HANA digitization actually allows you to do more digital interrogation on that. In the mining sector, another example that they've been trying to do for a long time, which I think is getting easier, is ore body modeling. So a mining company will find a body of whatever they're after, gold, iron ore, whatever they're mining, and they'll try to report to the market what's the value of that in the ground and how big is it. And so they get a lot of really good data on kind of the surveys of what the body looks like, but the calculation to determine I've got so many tons of ore in the ground and that's worth this, so my balance sheet should look like this and my share price should go like this, is a science that is getting a lot more accurate and quicker with AI. So another example of that. And I think if you look at old business models versus new, I guess a couple of examples of people that I'm working with that I just find interesting is a company that looked at predictive outcomes based on large data sets. And so a really geeky group and really data-focused group. And so what did they decide to test it on? They decided to test it on the NBA basketball results. And they said, well, we've got all this public information on the NBA. Could we predict the results of an NBA game? And so they took all of the data and they started testing their predictive skills. And they were really accurate on NBA outcomes. So they've launched a business that is in the betting space to help punters have more information against betting agents on where to bet. But that's not their main business. That's just a piece that they've done. It's the prediction engine. So then they go, what do we predict next? Could you predict bond markets? Could you predict, a number of different areas? So I think that one's an interesting one. We've seen just recently, and I've seen a couple companies competing to get into this space, is they've taught LLMs computer languages. And we've seen in the last 2 weeks some of the announcements on that and the impact on the share prices of some of the impacted companies. But can you provide COBOL, the mainframe language, to an LLM and have it come back in Java? And the time reduction in coding is a big change. So I think the new model is really about kind of focusing on the clients and the industry and the business problems, and then applying the technology. So again, go deep in your learning in a particular area, go wide in the industry insight, and if you're solving the business problems, that is really helpful. And I think the other is just that AI in accelerating transformation. So I'll just talk a little bit about leadership in the AI economy. I think the change is the first word that came to my mind was curiosity. Is a good leader is always curious, and it's like, why is this happening? What is the data? Like trying to understand that. And I think leadership we'll see is curious. It'll be making offensive and defensive moves at the same time. They go, I have some insight, but so does somebody else. And what will that look like? Using the digital insights, the people are still incredibly, incredibly important. So whilst we kind of think tech and leadership it's something a leader must know, they must be able to manage the people in order to get to the outcome as well. And again, I mentioned industry knowledge and some of the data insights. So I'll just talk a little bit I'm kind of getting a note that we might get into another discussion. I'll talk about career and skills. I think the co-op model that we've been talking about is so important, is that you're bringing a bridge between education and industry. And I think you guys have all experienced some of that, of how do you take the foundation of education, bridge it into the industry and be ready to go. The skills, industry domain, specialization depth, and thinking of that T-shape is how do you do that in managing your career, I think is a great example. I've mentioned earlier too that the X-Pro experience that you have it's real life. So you've got that, use that in your advancing your career as you've been there and you've done that. The one thing I've actually talked about this a couple of times is my view in education on AI is I relate it to a PC. So historically in education, we would feed students information, and you'd store it. And then we'd ask you to recall it. So like a PC, it was a storage on your PC. And so the process of that education was gain information to your storage and have the ability to recall it. I think where we're moving into now, everybody has the same storage. Everybody has access to information that's on par. I think the shift is going to be like a PC. If you think of RAM and processing speed and thinking, is how do I, if I assume everybody has the same data, how do I get insights and actions and results out of that data quicker? So I think that's a balance, and that education needs to grapple with, is that the idea of testing your knowledge. You still need to have that as foundational in order to ask the speed questions, but going through and thinking about a little bit of a shift in the industry that way. I think we're about at time, Raj. We're at. One of the things I think that's going to accelerate AI is storytelling, right? Is because everybody's trying different things. When a bank hears another bank did this, they'll go, oh, I'll do that, right? And I think that's storytelling. And I think it's an odd technology, is that we're all very familiar with it and have access to it personally. And then how we use it, how do you apply that into real life? So I'm going to tell a personal story, but then I'm going to ask some other people to tell about what's their AI experience story and maybe how it might translate. So my personal story, last year, I like a little bit of adventure. I was on a small sailboat somewhere between Africa and Italy, and we had an alarm on the sailboat went off. So, beeping alarms on a sailboat are never good. And we looked at it and we went, what is it? And he said, it's the bilge pump. So if you don't know a boat, water comes into a boat as you go through waves, and the bilge pump pumps the water back out. And it told us that our bilge pump was out, which is not good when you're on a boat. You want the water out on the outside, not the inside. So we said, what's our redundancy? Can we manually pump this? Yes, we could. Okay, we got to fix the bilge pump. And I said to the captain, I said, do you have the manual for the boat? And he said, yeah, it's downstairs. It's 20,000 pages. And I said, do you have it on PDF? He said, yes. And he gave it to me on PDF. And I put it into Copilot at the time. And I said, give me the flow diagram for the bilge pump. And it came back with the engineering diagram of the bilge pump. And I went, oh. And I said, give me the electrical diagram. They came back with that. We went down below deck, pulled it apart, and from the diagram, it was obvious. We're not skilled mechanics. We repaired that. I think then you go back to, say, the mining industry, where you're working on equipment, and you got an engineer that doesn't know a particular machine. That access to it, is how that might work. So that's my kind of personal example. And I do think I'd be interested, maybe we could pass the mic around a little bit about individual experiences with AI, whether it be on a personal level or with a client or a company. Got one here? Here you go.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this wonderful discourse on the utility of AI, not only for business but for different activities. Just to share my thought, me being from the core domain of law, so we use AI for predictive analysis of judgments. Like, say, suppose when we are going to,
Sure.
speak before a particular courtroom, we need to understand the mind of the judge and the kind of reasoning that he is actually following in. So, to have that closer understanding as to how he is, using the law. The reasoning of the law in the delivery of the judgments, we sometimes use AI for doing a predictive analysis, and that is what we follow for placing a case before him. So I have a small question for you, if
Yep.
you may, please, because this audience that you have before you today is a mix of students from the Department of Management
Yep.
and students from the Department of Law who are doing a dual integrated course of BBA LLB honors. So I'm sure it is going on in their minds, but as their spokesperson, I put off this question to you so that they have better clarity as to how these courses would be, simulation exercises would be helpful for them. I mean, in the age of AI, what these courses would help them, these simulation exercises would help students from the domain of law, but with doing a dual degree in business administration.
Yep.
If you could highlight on that.
Okay. As an AI example or as an X-Pro example?
As an X-Pro example.
X-Pro example. Raj, the question was, and you guys might be better to answer this, from an X-Pro perspective, the contribution to law and some of the decision making and kind of how the workshops might be around that. That works too.
I think I'll give it to Anirudh to speak about this. I understand that all of you are enrolled for the next batch, which is starting next week. AI obviously plays a big role, and this whole business transformation with AI, we're using digital as the mode of transformation, becomes important to every industry vertical. So how we will work is that we will take one problem statement in your specific area, which is in law, and then I've discussed with you, and look at how that impacts the organization and using transformation as the way forward. And the methodology we'll use is very effective AI. So would you like to add on that?
So you see the X-Pro framework that you've been going through, or some of you might have done some projects. Although it looks like it's a tech project, it's like a technology domain or technology reference. It can be suited to any context that you have. And essentially, an agile framework is not really dependent on what field you're tackling. Having said that, law is a very specialized domain, and imagine, and there have been AI models that lawyers use today. In fact, I remember there was this article about a law organization actually stopped hiring any more interns because they felt that the AI models are doing much better job when it comes to looking at information. Although I think, to be honest, what they missed is, and which is common across all domains otherwise as well. Organizations today are going overboard with cost cutting, imagining that AI will solve all the problems. It's not going to happen that way. And there are instances when if you stop hiring young people, at some point of time, maybe another dozen years from now or 6-7 years from now, we'll be left with all old people, and then who will actually bring in new ideas? And AI cannot really. We all know that AI works on old data, not new data. I mean, the one limitation is about how do you invent things. Now, coming back to this specific instance, if I can imagine scenarios on on law as a problem statement. And imagine a bunch of lawyers who are very socially motivated, wanting to do justice to the PILs or maybe even poor people who are not able to afford lawyer fees. Maybe we can come up with that kind of problem statement, package it in what we call as sprints. Now, sprints is just a fancy word of replacing a problem and solution into steps. Once you're able to define specific steps and make sure that you're satisfying the client, in this case it could be a law company or a lawyer, all of it will fall in place. And we have actually kind of perfected the art of creating this kind of structure given a particular problem statement, and that's how I think it will add a lot of value.
Can I share maybe from a corporate legal perspective in contract law, kind of an example I think might become more real? Well, it is real. It's the speed of it. If in my history, if we were doing a large contract with somebody, there's usually the 7 clauses that were really difficult. It was how you're going to handle IP, what are your limits, liabilities, et cetera. And so the management would make some risk decision that was kind of based on, well, is it big enough? Do we want to try it? I think where it's going to go is then looking into that company. What's their history of litigation? What is the real risk position? What is, if this system doesn't work, is it going to take out the business? And so you're starting to make decision making about those. How much IP are we really using? So as you get into those contract negotiations and speed, instead of the intuitive part of managing around the information, having a wider data set to make better predictive decisions on it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, it's interesting with the private equity firms I'm working with now, is in order to calculate the value, they're also looking at AI impact on EBIT. And so they kind of go, if I apply that, I'll go from an EBIT of 8% to 12, I'll still go 8 times. So that's a good question. Thank you. I think we have time for.
I have a student who has a question or would like to say something.
Terrific.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Pronit Datta from the team Byte. We worked on a project of cancer cell prediction with AI models. So AI models can be trained on various data. Okay, so LLMs can also be trained on legal data. So we are learning how to use these tools. So, there are things like PCR, prior case retrieval, and case entailment. So these models can be used for in those domains also. Okay, in such a way, like it won't take our jobs, it won't snatch away our jobs. It can be used as an assistant, so we can tackle much more cases like that. So yeah,
it's a good point, and I do think, this is the T, right? So now you come from healthcare into legal, and you kind of go, I've got a use case, and you kind of go, I get it. So I think as that storytelling continues, we'll come up with more. Do we have one more question? Any other questions? We'll call it a wrap. It's been one more? Terrific. Was there another question back there? Okay. You've been a really great audience. Thank you. Thanks for the interaction. I hope you found it insightful. Again, I'm not an expert on a particular subject or a professor in that area. All I can share about is the experience that I've had in my role. So I hope you find that helpful. I hope maybe one thing you'll take away in your career and you go, I remember when Doug said, and then that's helpful for you. And if that's just one thing, then it's been worthwhile. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you today. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we did have one more.
Actually, I have a question. Basically, AI using the vast data So, do you know if any country protect their data to be used by another country or internationally?
You're talking about data sovereignty?
Yes.
That's really important. It's so use case specific, right? So is your question that, are you seeing it shared across countries?
Yes, like in the recent phenomenon, we saw how Claude AI used in Venezuela.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I guess there's probably a view is, you got large language models in AI, and then there's probably more emerging small language models that sit behind your firewall with the data that you've got. I think that's more the sovereign data that we're seeing, is that people are using and aggregating their own data in a protected way to use it how they want to, using the AI tools. I'm not sure if that I answered your question though. Was that?
Yeah, kind
Yeah.
of.
Oh, sorry. We'll try it here. Here you go. Here you go.
Yeah, I think there are different levels of data sovereignty, and I think what we are referring to is more of at the national security level. And the Venezuelan example is an excellent example of how things can go wrong, and how even the largest corporates in the world are at mercy of what's the political will of that country, right? In that sense, I think the Indian government's initiative on developing own models that reside within the country, that makes sense. However, you must remember the same laws apply here as well. So whatever data sovereignty we are talking about in India, the same data can be breached based on the national situation at that point of time. So if I have some data residing in India, and there is a situation that requires that data to be exposed or used by the political will, I think there's nothing that can stop them. There is a slightly different perspective to it, and sorry, I'm just taking one more minute. I think in the corporate context, what we should be worried about, or where we should be going, is not about data sovereignty in terms of where is it residing. I think it's more about how limited we expose our own data to the outside world. So just yesterday, or in today's, Microsoft updates, you will probably see that Microsoft has released a co-work within Copilot. So Copilot resides in the organizational environment, and then co-work helps you to use agents based on that, the organization's secure data. So it doesn't go outside. In a larger context, it could be the country or a state government or whatever, right? Again, see, as soon as we're talking about for-profit organizations trying to do this, there will always be a danger of Microsoft at some point of time coming back and saying, okay, now pay me whatever, $100 a month or $100 a day, and you're at the mercy of that organization. So there's no right or wrong way of doing this, or having a perfect balance at both the national or the organizational level. In fact, if you go deeper and your own personal data, I think all of us willingly give our data to Google, right? And Google is no saint, isn't it? At one fine day, Google can obviously decide and charge you for it. So we'll have to live with it. And unless you close your eyes or just throw away all your digital footprints and decide to live in a cave, I think we have to live with this assumption. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again. Oh, there's another question over here. Do we have time, or do we?
I think a paucity of time, we'll have to conclude today. And thank you so much for joining in. You've been a lovely audience. We've been here from morning, and we come back very soon, and surely on the induction, and then we're going to have a certification ceremony of these. They're starting off the
Yep,
batch next
yep.
week.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.